Both sides should be blamed for last week's violence in Virginia. And the death toll from mudslides and severe floods in Sierra Leone keeps rising.
Hello and a very good evening. Democratic Party member Howard Lam was taken to hospital this morning after he reported feeling unwell while in police custody. He was arrested early yesterday on suspicion of misleading police over his abduction claim. Dozens of officers went to Sai Kung Beach today to look for evidence as part of the investigation. Winner Wong reports.
Officers could be seen at a beach near Tai Mong Tsai in Sai Kung at around noon today. Standing in rows, they searched the sand inch by inch. No stone was left unturned. They took away a piece of blood-stained tissue paper and a soiled cigarette packet. Officers also spoke to fishers at the beach and took pictures of the surrounding area. They also knocked on doors in the area looking for clues. Later, they carried on with their investigation at Sai Kung Town Center and checked a minibus station with routes to Mongkok. Last Friday, Lam held an emergency press conference claiming he was abducted by what he called mainland forces while he was shopping on Portland Street in Mongkok the day before. He said they warned him not to contact Liu Xia, the wife of Nobel Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobo, who died recently in a hospital on the mainland. Lam also claimed the abductors beat him up and put over 20 staples in his legs and stomach before leaving him on a beach in Sai Kung. He visited the Sai Kung area with reporters soon after the press conference and said the beach here in Tai Mong Tsai looked similar to the one where he ended up at during the alleged abduction. But in a major plot twist, Lam was arrested early yesterday on suspicion of misleading police over his abduction claim. In recent years, Lam had openly talked about having depression and thyroid cancer. He reportedly felt unwell at around midnight last night. He was taken to Queen Elizabeth Hospital and admitted to the internal medicine ward about 3 hours later. He was then transferred to the hospital's custodial ward later in the morning. Winner Wong, TVB News.
Some are worrying about the effect yesterday's court ruling on a group of activists will have on future protest movements. Jail terms were handed down on the 13 defendants, even after they'd served their original community orders. Elmi Lung has more.
Former student leader Lester Shem expressed concerns over yesterday's revised court ruling on the 13 activists. Although they had already served their community service orders, all were slapped with prison terms of up to 13 months for charging into the Legislative Council building 3 years ago. Minor clashes, pushing barricades now constitute as acts of violence. By this standard, it will have a huge impact on participant numbers in future street movements, said Lester Sham, former Secretary General of the Hong Kong Federation of Students. One pro-government lawmaker thinks the revised sentences are appropriate and not political persecution, as some have suggested.
Well, I can't agree with the persecution as such. A review of the sentencing guideline in line of what happened in the past few years.
Meanwhile, prosecutors asked to review sentences for 3 Occupy Central leaders who stormed into a fenced-off area at the government headquarters. Alex Chow, Nathan Law and Joshua Wong will learn their fate at the High Court tomorrow. Wong said he's prepared to face immediate imprisonment, but hopes that young people will not stop fighting for democracy.
I still hope to encourage Hong Kong people to keep on fight for democracy. When the one who need to face imprisonment and the youngster that need to be sent to jail still continue to stand in the front line, I think there's no reason for Hong Kong people to step backward.
Elmi Long, TVB News.
Turning overseas now, a combative and insistent US President Donald Trump repeated there is blame on both sides for the deadly violence last weekend in Charlottesville, Virginia. As Alan Buckner reports, his remarks effectively wiped out a more conventional statement he made on Monday.
One person was killed and almost 20 injured when a car reportedly driven by a Nazi sympathizer plowed into a group opposing an alt-right demonstration. In his statement on Monday, Trump specifically condemned neo-Nazis and white supremacists as criminals and thugs. At a press conference yesterday, he was asked why it took him 2 days to issue the condemnation.
Before I make a statement, I need the facts. So I don't want to rush into a statement. So making the statement when I made it was excellent.
Under questioning from reporters, Trump reverted to his initial reaction last weekend that there were many sides to blame.
I will tell you something. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now.
Trump's failure to immediately condemn white supremacists led to the resignations of 4 major company CEOs from the White House Manufacturing Council. Trump reacted with disdain.
They're leaving out of embarrassment because they make their products outside, and I've been lecturing them about you have to bring it back to this country.
Trump's latest comments touched off a new wave of protests.
I'm here today because my country is very divided, and I'd like to be on the right side of history.
We will not stand by while he condones and encourages white supremacy and violence against innocent people.
Saturday's demonstration in Charlottesville was sparked by the planned removal of a statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Despite the violence in Charlottesville, other cities and jurisdictions are now considering removing Confederate statues as well. The mayor of Dallas, Texas, called for a task force to review the potential removal of statues in that city, calling them dangerous totems that divide society. Alan Buknia, TVB News.
More indications today of a willingness to lower the temperature after North Korea appeared to back away from a plan to send missiles near the U.S. Pacific territory of Guam. U.S. officials are signaling that negotiations are still possible if North Korea takes specific actions first. James Aitken reports.
After North Korean leader Kim Jong-un delayed a decision on a plan to send 4 missiles into waters off Guam, top U.S. officials remain on guard.
What is the U.S. prepared to do if he proceeds with that missile firing?
Here in the Pentagon, we are part of the Sentinels for our nation, and we stand ready to defend our nation.
America's top diplomat signaled the U.S. is willing to talk with North Korea.
Do you have any response to Kim Jong-un's decision to pull back on Guam?
We continue to be interested in finding a way to get to dialogue, but that's up to him.
At the State Department, a spokesperson stressed that such talks will only happen when the time is right.
When they show that they are serious about an effort to move toward denuclearization. We have not seen that yet. Remember, and let me go back to this again, 2 nuclear tests last year, 2 ICBM tests in a month alone. We have not seen that they've been serious at this point.
In Guam, meanwhile, no change in its threat level.
And we expect that the threat level will remain the same. We are hopeful that diplomacy will win the day.
Meanwhile, a published report in the U.S. is raising new questions about where North Korea obtained the defense technology to make recent leaps in its nuclear program. The New York Times said Pyongyang may have purchased rocket engines from a factory in Ukraine. Factory officials call the report fake news and insist the company has not produced military-grade ballistic missiles since independence from the Soviet Union in 1991.
Що такого не було в природі.
Ukraine's prime minister calls the claims a provocation. An official from Ukraine's space agency says transferring such expertise would require access to rocket fuel production technology that only China and Russia possess. James Aitken, TVB News.
And the Trump administration has denounced the Islamic State for carrying out genocide against Christians and other religious minorities in areas under its control. It comes as the U.S. State Department issued its annual report on religious freedom worldwide. US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson didn't mince his words when he said ISIS is clearly responsible for genocide against Christian, Yazidis and Shiite Muslims in areas under its control.
ISIS is also responsible for crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing directed at these same groups, and in some cases against Sunni Muslims, Kurds, and other minorities. More recently, ISIS has claimed responsibility for attacks on Christian pilgrims and churches in Egypt.
His comments were made as the US State Department released its annual report on international religious freedom. Tillerson said he was making the pronouncement to remove any ambiguity about previous genocide assertions made by his predecessor, John Kerry. America's top diplomat also said people of many religions still face persecution or restrictions on practicing their faiths.
Almost 80% of the global population live with restrictions on or hostilities to limit their freedom of religion. Where religious freedom is not protected, we know that instability, human rights abuses, and violent extremism have a greater opportunity to take root.
In addition to ISIS, Tillerson in the report called out Bahrain, China, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Sudan and Turkey for persecuting, stigmatizing or otherwise restricting the rights of religious minorities.
The death toll from massive mudslides in the capital of the West African nation of Sierra Leone has gone up to about 400. Authorities say the number is certain to rise as bodies wash up on a beach and workers search for an untold number of people buried in their homes. The Red Cross estimates that 600 people are still missing. Many were trapped under tons of mud as they slept. Officials say contingency plans are being put in place to mitigate the outbreak of disease like cholera. A mountainside collapsed Monday following heavy rain in the former British colony. It's one of the deadliest natural disasters in Africa in recent years. And the death toll from recent floods and landslides in northern India, Nepal and Bangladesh has risen to 245. Incessant rain has battered the region, stranding hundreds of thousands. In southern Nepal, authorities scrambled to get relief supplies to flood-hit areas. In the Chitan district of Nepal, hotels sent elephants to rescue stranded tourists. The area is a popular destination for rhino watching and elephant rides. Deadly landslides and flooding are common across South Asia during the monsoon season that stretches from June to September.
And still ahead on the news tonight, strengthened laws and stepped-up prosecution being considered to fight improper use of industrial buildings. A tree collapsed during a Christian festival on the Portuguese island of Madeira kills 12.
Welcome back. Development Chief Michael Wong says he's considering strengthening legislation on industrial building safety and boosting prosecution of owners operating illegally in those buildings.
3 young people lost their lives in a subdivided industrial building flat in Kwai Chong that went up in flames last weekend. Initial investigations by the Buildings Department found that the owner of the 10th floor unit where they were killed was not authorised to divide up the 6,000 square foot space into 17 separate rooms. The development chief today warned such owners that the government would be cracking down on the improper use of industrial buildings, and that would involve enacting new laws and boosting factory patrols and prosecution.
It used to be the government's measures. When something bad happened, we would look only at enforcement. Now, that's something that we need to do. I mean, we do need to make sure that enforcement is carried out in an effective manner.
The chief executive yesterday said she had asked Wong's bureau to consider relaunching industrial building revitalisation measures, which were discontinued last year. Under the revitalisation of factory building scheme, single owners of an industrial building could change the building's use without having to pay a hefty premium.
At the moment, we are looking forward to completing the reviews concerned within about 6 to 9 months. But we are not certain about that yet because the chief executive only announced the the options concerned yesterday, so we are working on the details. So we do need some time to determine the timeline.
He added that his bureau would also look into increasing the powers of Buildings Department officers who are currently having difficulty accessing industrial buildings to conduct safety checks.
A new road connecting Kai Tak and Sam Po Kong will officially be put to use at midnight tonight. Chief Executive Carrie Lam, Secretary for Development Michael Wong, Director of Civil Engineering and Development Lam Sai Hung and other top officials took part in an opening ceremony for Kai San Road today. The road, stretching 570 metres, starts at Hip Chu Road and ends at Sat Po Street.
The funeral of the late rural leader Lau Wong Fat will take place tomorrow. This evening, the visitation is being held at the Hong Kong Funeral Home in North Point. Dignitaries, including State Leader Jiang De-jiang and Chief Executive Carrie Lam, have sent wreaths to the funeral parlour. Lau died last month at the age of 80. He had been chairman of the rural body Heung Yi Kuk for more than 30 years. He was also a lawmaker and a member of the Executive Council. The funeral will take place tomorrow morning. Rituals will also be held during the day at the Heung Yi Kuk headquarters in Sha Tin, in front of Tun Mun's Tien Hao Temple and at Lau's home village of Lung Ku Tan, where he'll be buried.
Turning overseas again, the revelation that Australia's Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce is a New Zealand citizen has stoked a rare diplomatic spat between the two countries. Joyce said on Monday he may not be eligible for Parliament after being told he may be a dual citizen. But Australia's Foreign Minister accused New Zealand's opposition of colluding with the Australian Labor Party to undermine the current government in Canberra.
This is highly unethical at least, but more importantly puts at risk the relationship between the Australian government and the New Zealand government.
I've certainly made it very clear that I don't want this situation to get in the way of the important relationship between New Zealand and Australia. That is why it was so important to me yesterday to send that message clearly and directly to the Australian High Commission and to the Minister herself. I would welcome a conversation with the Minister to clarify from our perspective what's happened.
In Portugal yesterday, a tree toppled into a crowd of worshippers during a major Christian festival on the island of Madeira. Officials say 12 people were killed and dozens injured. The annual festival draws big crowds to celebrate the island's patron saint, Our Lady of the Mount. The tree fell near a shrine in a park as worshippers prepared for a procession. Reports say the tree was rotten and had been partly supported by a metal cable. Right, Tony, you serving up some tennis first?
I am indeed,
okay.
Yes, starting in the United States. Dominic Thiem cruised into the third round of the Western and Southern